Welcome to The Healthy Advisor, a podcast from WealthManagement.com focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. I'm Diana Britton, managing editor of WealthManagement.com, and in this podcast we explore some of the struggles and personal development issues facing advisors and financial services professionals, and how to get to a place of healing for mind, body, and spirit. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Healthy Advisor podcast, and thanks for joining us. As you may know, this is the podcast focused on financial advisor health and well-being, and today's guests have some great insights for us. They are Anna Howard, head of private wealth at LPL Financial, and Kimberly Sanders, head of strategic wealth at LPL. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, Diana.
Yep, thanks for having us.
So Anna and Kimberly are both highly accomplished leaders in wealth management. They're also just passionate mentors to other women in the industry. They're working to help, they're working to build up the next generation of strong women leaders in the industry, but they're also mothers and speak openly about with advisors about the importance of finding balance, which can be especially hard for women in this industry. But I love how open and honest they are about their daily struggles, and they're not trying to pretend to be this perfect working mom that super mom that can do it all. And I totally feel some of that as well. I'm a full-time working mom myself, and so I think this is going to be a great lively conversation. But Kimberly and Anna, I just wanted you to start by telling me a little bit about your personal stories and how you got into financial services. Maybe Kimberly, do you want to start?
Sure. It's a fairly traditional path, actually. So I had finance undergrad and then worked for a series of banks, a regional brokerage firm, an RIA. And then I made a shift into the corporate side of finance and focused on M&A after I got my master's. And that's, I think, really where my path took a turn that I hadn't expected. At that time, I was working in Silicon Valley and I got pregnant with my first daughter. And I took a sabbatical, which with every intention of getting right back at it after a year. I was always a girl with a plan, and that was the plan. And I remember about 10 months in, walking into my kitchen. I remember like the tile meeting the carpet with this really tacky gold thing that was separating the rooms, and looking at it and then looking at my husband and saying, not sure how you're getting us back to Phoenix, but I'm not going back to work. And then I just turned around and walked out. And I don't actually know who was more surprised by that decision, me, my husband, or my mother, because no one ever thought that that would be the call I'd make at that point. And I ended up staying at home for 8 years before I finally felt like the time was right to go back. So it was totally unexpected.
Yeah, and I mean, what was sort of the impetus for you to finally to go back?
Yeah, so it was turned out that both of my girls suffered from various disorders, and it really felt like I needed to be there to figure out how my family was going to be set up for the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah.
So we were going through counseling and trials with medication and things that really we were building all of those tools that we needed to actually handle the next, all through elementary, middle, high school, now college, right? So my girls are now 18 and 21, and the work that we did during those 8 years, like we're still using all of those strategies, and it's fantastic. And I loved every minute of being home with them, not only working on that, but I was, junior achievement mom and art masterpiece, and like I was everywhere, and I loved it. And eventually I was kind of volunteering for 40 hours a week, and it was like, okay, everyone's stable. It's time for me to go back. And that's kind of where, that struggle started to happen. Like I didn't really feel like it was a struggle to stay home any more than any other stay-at-home mom, because, that struggle is real. But when it came time to go back, I had this like culmination of like this mom guilt that was happening. And then all of a sudden my self-esteem, which has always been really strong, was like it was just, it tanked. It was horrible. I was sitting there going like, who is going to hire this woman in this green tracksuit? Like nobody. I've like completely lost all of my skills. And then I also had this gap on my resume now that was this 8-year gap. And I was like, no one was going to hire me. And turned out that was actually true. That resume, I just got like scanned over. Like I actually don't think a human ever looked at my resume because of the 8-year gap. And so when I had found this one position that I was like, it was just really calling to me, I thought like, this was it. This is how I can make a difference, because that was important to me too. And I was like, all right. So then I called my old CFO, and then he called someone he knew, who then called somebody he knew, to finally get my resume in front of a human to actually say, like, I actually think this woman can add value to the company. And then it took a hiring manager who valued family to say, look, I'm going to take a chance on this person who's been out of the workforce. So this is my moment that I always like to shout out the men, right? Because every single person in that chain to help me get from where I was to where I am today, they were all the men that were reaching their hands out and pulling me up. And I wouldn't have been able to do it if they hadn't stepped up.
Yeah, and I know that you were talking about, you called that having a male sponsor. What is a male sponsor? And talk a little bit about the importance of having that.
Yeah. So they say that a mentor is somebody who speaks with you, and a sponsor is somebody who speaks about you when you're not in the room. Like these are the advocates that women need as they progress in their careers. And they can be men, they can be women, it doesn't matter. But in an industry like ours, where women's representation is like closest to parity at like those entry level jobs, where it's like 49% women, 51% men, but like that balance totally deteriorates as we advance, right, with seniority. And that's happening across all industries, but it has been called out that it happens, the highest gap is actually with financial and healthcare sectors. And so in that case, our women's representation at the executive and senior management level is really, really low. So when you're trying to get back into the job market, you're trying to advance, you've got to raise your hand and like be looking for people to pull you up. And that's where that sponsor comes in. And in our industry, most of the time, when I was coming up, like it was mostly the men. And they're the ones that have to come in, they have to advocate for women as they're rising in the ranks. And I think that they have to have a voice in policy change, right? Making sure that we understand what it's like to bring people back in after they've taken the leave of absence, voicing their advocacy around flexibility in the workforce and in the workplace, right? So all of that needs to come from these sponsors. And in an industry like ours, at the time, they were mostly men. Now I feel like I'm blessed to be in a position to give back and to pay it forward. But I still think with representation as it is, it's going to take all of us to continue to close those gaps.
Yeah, that helps a lot. And I think that's great advice for just women coming up and trying to, climb the ladder in the industry. But Anna, I want to turn to you and, tell me a little bit about your personal story, how you got into the industry.
My entering into financial services was starting to pave its way when I was very young. My parents divorced when I was 6 years old, and I didn't see my dad that much. And I developed kind of an idolizing complex, if you will, around getting his attention and validation. My dad worked in financial services, and little did I know at the time, right, that seeking his attention and validation would lead me down this path. And so later in my career, when I recognized, I'd been to therapy, done a lot of self-reflection, and really recognized how I had built this path, it really took some soul searching and thinking about did I need to, take a different path, start a new career, or could I really find myself and step into more authenticity in this field that I was in? And so that's where I am, really bringing my whole self to work and encouraging others to do the same. And I've found a lot more fulfillment.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about your family. I know you recently brought on two foster children, but tell me about you and your family.
So my husband and I, we have two children, a 6-year-old daughter and a 8-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. And we recognized that we were just so fortunate and, lived in a little bit of a bubble, right? And we all want our kids to see the bigger world and have empathy and help other people. And so for us, we really thought about, what does that mean for our family? What could we do to help others? And we decided to go down this path to become foster parents. And it was a long path of all kinds of training and inspections, and recently kind of crossed that threshold into being ready and brought in two children. To be honest, it's a lot, and I think we're really finding our way through it and coming together as a family and figuring out what can we handle, what really works for us, how do we manage this as a family. It's tough, but I do see so much beauty in my children having better perspective and really understanding how others grow up that's so different to us, and how can we reach out and help them.
Yeah, I that's great. I mean, I think for me, I have two kids, and obviously you're dealing with double that. But in both me and my husband, we both work full time, and for us, like COVID kind of changed everything in terms of allowing us to work from home and have a little bit more flexibility in terms of taking the kids to soccer practice and picking them up at the bus stop and being there for them. We're not commuting into New York City every day, and getting home at, late at night. But also like just having like a village around you. I mean, I mean, I know that it sounds kind of cliche, but it's really important. And so 2 years ago, we moved out to California from New York because my family's here, my mom's here, my brother, and we just wanted more support. And so that's just really something that's helped us like juggle, work and home and just having more support and having that village around you. What are some of the things, what are some of the biggest struggles for you in sort of juggling, work and parenting, Anna?
It's a great question, because I think it's one that comes up all the time and has to be continually revisited, because it's not like you crack the code and you figure it out, right? I think for me, what I'm focused on right now is trying to come to my kids with some energy and not completely fried, and really
Mm.
thinking about, how do I pace myself at work? How do I reserve energy? Because most of the time that I spend with them is in the evenings, right? And then the weekends. And I used to just run myself into the ground at work and come home really fried, and quite honestly, like, not very patient and kind with them sometimes. And so I really had to think about that and pay attention to myself, and that's really helped me. The other component is actually finding time for myself and not feeling guilty about it, right? It's so easy to work all day, and then, as soon as we click off of work, it's the kids,
Mm.
go till we get them down to bed, and then we're completely exhausted. And so how do I rest and fill myself up? And that's something that my husband and I have been negotiating a lot about lately, is like, okay, you take the kids on your own. I really need to rest and just decompress, and then doing the reverse for the other person.
Yeah. Yeah. And like finding time to exercise too. That's so important, I think, because that's something that for me personally just gives me more energy to do everything. But Kimberly, what are some of the coping mechanisms that you use to help you deal with the stress of being a full-time executive at LPL and a mother?
I think kind of going back to your support system comment, I think that's number one for me was like we had to figure out what worked for us, right? We
Mhm.
learned very quickly that our family did better with one parent at home. And so I stayed home for the 8 years. Then my husband, we both were working full time for about 2 years. And then he took his own sabbatical and he stayed home. And that's really the only way that I can manage it is that I feel completely safe that everything is being handled at home when I am at work and when I'm traveling, right? And I know he felt the same way when he was working and I was staying at home. So like for us, that was critical. We always have lived on one income just so that we can pivot like that. So we made that decision early and just kind of stuck with it. So that's one. I think another one for me was like, and this is, I think everyone, you have to figure out what your non-negotiables are. So
Mhm.
I knew that I didn't ever want to miss anything for my kids that I deemed important, that they deemed important. And so it meant like I've had to work really weird hours. I've had to work on the weekends so that I could take a Thursday afternoon off. You know, I've had to say no to travel, important travel, and I've just had to be like, no, this is one of my non-negotiables. I cannot do that trip. I can do another trip. But I always made sure I was there. And so that helped with the guilt, right? Like I know that we all feel, that like, am I doing the right thing? Am I spending too much time at work? Am I a workaholic? Right? Like those questions come up all the time. But because I stayed true to that non-negotiable, like that has helped. Like I've only missed 2 things ever for the kids. I still feel guilty about those 2 things, but at least I'm like I'm able to say like you're doing okay, right? You're doing okay. So when the emotions kind of get the better of me, I can come back to that and say like, look, you're there when you need to be there. And then I think you have to figure out your hacks, right? Like I wish I had an exercise thing. I've not figured out the exercise thing. But I do know that when it comes time for self-care, like I do better if I make an appointment, right? If I'm only disappointing myself, I'm going to stay at work.
Yeah.
But if I've made a commitment to somebody else, whether it's a therapist, a massage therapist, a facial, a friend, my kids, like I will show up. And I don't like I think that's really important. And so I will honor that. So like those are my hacks. Like if I have to schedule self-care.
Yeah, that's a great pointer. I want to just talk a little bit about, or just bring up some stats on, females in the industry. Women still represent just 18% of total advisor headcount, according to Cerulli Associates. I don't have the number for overall, in financial services industry, what women represent, but still pretty low. And women cited, a high failure rate, unstable compensation, pressure to meet revenue or production goals, and lack of familiarity with the profession as top factors discouraging them from entering the industry. And then just a little bit about just overall women, taking on more responsibility in the household. A 2020 Gallup study found that although women comprise nearly half of the US workforce, they still fulfill a larger share of household responsibilities. Married or partnered heterosexual couples in the US continue to divide household chores along largely traditional lines, with the woman shouldering primary responsibility for doing the laundry, 58%, cleaning the house, 51%, and preparing meals for 51%. Men continue to take the lead in keeping the car in good condition, 69%, and doing yard work, 59%, which is good stuff there. I don't want to do those things. But I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of dads out there that are staying at home. Kimberly, like your husband, and that there's definitely a struggle there for working fathers. Keeping the balance. My husband, takes my son to soccer practice like 4 times a week, and he's very involved, as much as he can. But in a world where statistics are showing us and pointing us that women still fulfill that larger share of household responsibilities, what are some ways that women can thrive in this industry? I don't know who wants to take this one first, but
Start. So, look, I'll just say for myself, what has worked is that I ask my husband for help all the time, and I really push for equal partnership. And part of that is me really letting go of how I want things done, right? And like just getting it done by anyone who's willing to help and jump in. So I definitely have that dynamic with my husband, but I also have it with the bigger village that we've been talking about. Like, my in-laws come to visit or my parents come over. It's like, hey, can you help me with this? Can someone jump in, help with this or that? And it makes a big difference. But I think it also takes a level of humility from me to say, look, I don't have it all together. I'm not perfect. My house is a mess and I need help. And I do find people are willing to help.
Yeah. I would echo one of the points that you said, which is like it was really hard for me. I totally lived into that definition that you had about like we were doing everything. We were working and we were responsible for childcare and cleaning and cooking and everything. I was living that, but it was my own damn fault that I was living it. Like my husband was absolutely willing to do any of it, but I was spending that but that's not how I would have done it. That's not how I wanted
right.
it done, right? And it took a long time for me just to say like, okay, like the laundry is not done and you can wear dirty clothes. I don't care. Or I will go to Target and I'll buy you new clothes because like that is where we're at right now. And I just had to say like it is like if it was on his list, I needed to leave it on his list. I didn't need to swoop in and take care of it and do it a different way or do it sooner. And I would say it was probably about 2 years of me having to like coach myself off that ledge before it settled down and it was like, okay, like now we're humming. And I think the other thing is we absolutely outsource everything we can possibly outsource. So nobody's doing the lawn, right? Nobody's
Yeah.
doing that. Nobody's doing the cars. Like we both have said like those things can be outsourced and together we have to do the stuff that we don't want other people to do in our home. So I think that's our other strategy.
Yeah, that's great. I fully support the outsourcing. Um, and yeah, I think as for me, I think I've done a really bad job as well, just because I think like you, Kimberly, I want to do it myself, make sure it gets done right. And and maybe I am sometimes afraid to ask him for help where I should. But I mean, I just went on vacation without my family, with my mom, and my husband handled everything for a week and a half. And he did have support from my sister-in-law, but I came back and I was just like, I don't know if my kids had lunches every day at school. I don't know if they had snacks. I don't know if they had water. I don't know if they got bathed every night or went to bed on at a decent hour. But I was like, I'm not gonna ask. I'm just gonna, everything's fine. It might not have been perfect, but like, or done the way I would have done it, but like, that's fine. You got to have that time away from the kids sometimes. Yeah. Like, let's talk about Instagram and, there's always this pressure, seeing moms do certain things on Instagram. I constantly look at the bento boxes. I don't know if you guys do that, like with the perfectly cut like fruit and all the like completely balanced lunches, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do more. My kids don't eat. But what are some things that women can do, and specifically advisors and women in this industry, to get away from that whole Instagram pressure that we might see? I don't know if Anna,
Yeah.
maybe you want to start.
Sure. I try to be real and vulnerable with people so that they know that it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? I may show up put together, but I may have had a disaster of a morning prior to that or something else. And I think being real with people allows them to do the same with me and others. And also like it's tough. I'm still finding my way. And the thing that I keep coming back to that I know again and again is that I'm happier when I let go of what other people think and I really listen to myself. And I think it's helpful when we support each other in this pursuit. And, the best we can do is good enough. I also personally really limit my social media, but that's a really personal choice. I just reflected on, how does it make me feel when I'm looking at these perfect bento boxes and other things. And for me, it just wasn't like, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think I've kind of followed a little bit of that same path. I basically only look at Instagram for the dogs that are talking with the buttons. That's all I look at. I enjoy them talking on the buttons, and that is what I pay attention to. But I also am kind of doing that talk track that Anna talked about. And I just say, like, what would you tell your kids? Like, you would be telling your girls, like, as long as you're proud of who you are and where you are and what you're about to accomplish next, right? Like, it doesn't matter what other people are doing. And it's really tough. But if I just kind of treat myself the way I would treat them, I think that helps. But I also really do not spend a lot of time on social media because you just get sucked in. I think you have to be a really, really strong person to be on it and not have it affect you in a negative way.
Yeah. I will recommend one Instagram account. It's a mom. Her account is called Big Time Adulting, and she's like kind of the complete opposite of what you see on Instagram. She will just like curse and tell you like it is, like, that she had a bad day with her kids. And at the end of every one, she's like, don't worry, don't be hard on yourself. Go get yourself a snack. You're doing a great job. So get yourself a snack. I guess I wanted to just, wrap this up by, how do the experiences that you've talked about today, ladies, play into the work that you're doing at LPL? Because I think that that's really important for the industry.
Personally, I think like the women's network at LPL is like nothing I've ever experienced. I mean, that's Anna and I are doing this podcast and we've done other things together, but it's because like on the corporate side, all of the women in our positions, like we lock arms to support each other. We lean on each other. We lift each other up. There is such trust across this tribe that it has created a space where like everyone benefits. Like there's no competition. It's like, how do you need my help today? And can I lean on you tomorrow? And so like that trust, I think it permeates everything we do at LPL. And you kind of see that same thing that's happening with the women advisors. So LPL has the largest group of women advisors in the independent space, and more women are choosing LPL every single year than any other independent platform. And so you see it at conferences, local events, study groups, a digital community. And we find that those connections and those shared experiences are making a huge difference for the women advisors. They are figuring out how they're having these same conversations, right? How are you doing it with kids? What happens when you need to travel? Does your husband stay home, or are you having to figure it, balance it all yourself? How are you finding a successor? How are you moving up in the ranks? How are you finding a position that is a salaried position? Because what you mentioned earlier about this kind of this discomfort with unstable income, like that's a thing for women, right? So can they find jobs as planners? Can they find a position where someone's going to pay them a salary to be a servicing advisor, instead of having to do the eat what you kill philosophy? So like I think that there's a lot that we're doing as corporate citizens. It's also what we're doing with our advisor community to try and create flexibility and choice and having different models that apply to all different advisors. Because just like the three of us are all kind of tackling motherhood and working in a different way, advisors are all that they're in that same boat. So some of them are looking for fully independent models. Some of them are looking for fully supported models, right? And so the fact that we have that opportunity for women and men, right, to plug in where they feel is the right place for them at the right time, I think that speaks a lot to what we've learned as individuals kind of moving through through the process, right? And how can we then give that back and turn that into products or channels that benefit everybody?
Yeah, I love that. And Anna, anything to add? I know that, obviously you're on the private wealth side, which is a fairly new, channel for LPL.
I agree completely with the comments that Kimberly made about bringing women up through the business and finding the right level of support so that they can be comfortable and successful. The other piece that I would bring into that is supporting others and bringing their whole selves to work every day, like really undoing the bounds of what's acceptable to talk about and understanding if it's impacting someone on my team, I want to talk about it. And I want to understand, what are the challenges? Because the reality is, as we talked about the statistics of women in the business, it's complicated, right? It's home life colliding with work life, and like, how do we make this all work? And I think being a true partner in that and being able to talk about anything and figure it out with them really enhances being able to bring your whole self and feeling valued in the team.
Yeah, that's great. Both of you just really great insights. Well, I'm afraid we're just about out of time. I would love to talk to you both all day about this stuff. But I'd like to thank my guests, Anna Howard and Kimberly Sanders at LPL, for being on the podcast and just opening up about some really vulnerable stuff and some great insights on advisor well-being. Thank you both so much.
Thanks for inviting us.
And if you'd like to reach out to either of them, you can find them on LinkedIn. We'll put that in the show notes. But if you have a struggle yourself and you wish to share your experiences and help others in similar situations, please feel free to reach out to me at diana.britton@informa.com. I'd like to thank you for listening to The Healthy Advisor. If you've not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This is Diana Britton reminding you that where there's healing, there is hope. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to The Healthy Advisor, a podcast focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of WealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Always seek the advice of your healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your particular situation.